Very much for greeting me so warmly, and I hope that also at the end of the talk and the discussion you will also say thank you very warmly. So it will not just be at the beginning, it will also be at the very end. Sometimes when the problem seems to defy a solution, or when the solutions that we have seem unable to solve the problem, one may need to consider the fact that the problem is with the problem, not with the solution. That is to say that maybe the problem defies any kind of solution, just objectively. You know, sometimes you're given a puzzle, and if you work at it, you know, these things in a box and you move them around. And if you're good at this kind of thing, after a while, maybe you can get things done. You can get the solution brought out. And sometimes, you know, you spend hours and then you give up and you throw the thing away. And when you throw the thing away, it's because sometimes you really do give up and you can't really do it. But sometimes, just imagine if there was something wrong anyway in the puzzle when the manufacturer produced it. It just doesn't fit. It doesn't, you can't really work on it in order to produce a solution. And I very often think to myself that this is perhaps what we have back home between Israelis and Palestinians, that it's not the problem is not with the solutions we have, that we have proposed over the years, the attempts that have been made. Maybe the problem is the problem itself, that it defies a solution, that objectively speaking, we cannot really come up with a solution for it. When I say that we cannot come up with a solution for it, I mean that by this, that we cannot, perhaps through reasoning and through rational thought and through calculation of mutual interests and through all of that, which people normally take into account when they negotiate a settlement, maybe in spite of our using all those parameters, we're not going to be able to, in fact, come up with anything. So if we do not come up with anything, and things just unfold and continue to roll by themselves, the question is, the next question that we have to think about is, where will they unroll towards? If we cannot make history ourselves, if we cannot actually design our future, not because we are unwilling, and not only because we are incapable, but because we cannot actually, the actual future is indefinable by us, this particular future. If that is the case, then maybe what we should start thinking about is not how we do it, but how it will actually, or what it will do to us. So looking at the future, trying to imagine how it will unroll before us, and trying to imagine maybe how best we can cope in order to minimize whatever pain, whatever suffering, whatever problems people have on both sides. Now, I say this because, as you heard earlier with Hanno, I mean, I began to tell you, I mean, I didn't, or I wasn't born with a particular idea for a solution. When I grew up, when I became of age to think of myself, I was the son of a Jordanian minister. And so, you know, I grew up thinking of myself as a Jordanian. And as not just any Jordanian, but as an important Jordanian minister. And we used to, you know, it used to be something that, you know, if you're a child of about 10 or 11, or child, young boy, 10 or 11, it would be something of which you would be proud, you know, you walk around and you say, I'm the son of the minister. And then 1967 happened. and history changed things. And suddenly, when you walked around, you had to hide the fact that you were the son of a Jordanian minister. And actually, it started being a thing that wasn't, or shouldn't have been, something to be proud of. So, whereas before people might have said, wow, you're the son of the minister, later people said, uh-oh, you're the son of the Jordanian minister. That's how it changed. But, you know, all this was happening while I was still growing up. And I didn't really have personally any ideas about politics. I really wasn't interested in politics. I was more interested in other things, sort of general things. My interests were in the world at large. And, you know, interests like everybody else has as they grow up as teenagers and so on. So I didn't really find politics as such very interesting. But then, somehow, the war happened. I got carried away into becoming politicized. I started thinking that we should somehow reclaim Palestine from the Jews and from the Israelis, whom I looked upon as my enemies. And so I became involved in politics. But, you know, in spite of the fact that I thought this is what I should do, reclaim Palestine from my enemies, the Jews and the Israelis, the first thing I did in that regard was to start having meetings with an Israeli colleague whom I met over there at university, and eating hummus with him together. So, I mean, imagine this was a time, this is just after, you know, maybe 68, 69. This was, I'm talking about Oxford University. If you went through, scanned the entire university in England, maybe you'd find one or two Palestinians. Actually, there were two, myself and another one. And the other one, his name is Ahmed Khalidi, by the way, is somebody that got involved in talks with Israelis over the years, and to some extent maybe still is. He's accused by some people, I think very knowledgeably, of having been involved in what they call the Abu Mazen-Beilan Jerusalem Agreement. I don't know if you heard about that. But Ahmed Khalidi was involved in that together with his colleague at the time, Hussein Ahab, who still actually is there out in the papers. I don't know if you ever read, because he wrote with Bob Manley about Camp David, and he was very much in the news. And so this duo, Hussein Agha and Ahmed Khalidi, who were at Oxford at the time when I was there. Hussein Agha, by the way, is half Lebanese and half Iranian. He's Shia. But he got friendly with Ahmed. And what I did, I mean, given the fact that there were only two of us Palestinians at Oxford at the time, and as far as I knew, only two Israelis at the time at Oxford. So what do we do in order to combat the Israelis and the Jews and to defend our rights? We started having hummus sessions together. Now, unfortunately, one of the two people who was at Oxford at the time passed away. He was a historian. He went back to Haifa University, and many years later he passed away. He's a wonderful gentleman. But the other person who was doing philosophy at the time, Avishai Margalit, is somebody I stayed in contact with. And I'm still, well, I'm not actually, not since his wife died last year, but I've been off and on in contact with him, and I've come across him also in different places throughout the world. But this is how it started. It started my politicization. It started by my beginning to try and to understand what a counterpart Israeli was thinking. Because obviously as a Palestinian I was feeling very angry. I had my own views, my own narratives in my head. I knew what I wanted. You know, I wanted to reclaim Palestine, all of Palestine. I wanted an Arab Palestine. I went around, you know, the flag, Free Palestine, and I was, you know, totally dead against any kind of compromise. All right, compromises for me just didn't figure. The only compromise I could make was the eating of hummus with Daesh. But then, as time evolved, many years later, I went to Harvard. And I was still pro a single state solution by the time I went there. And who comes to give a lecture at Harvard? Ahmed's father, the guy that was at Oxford, his father, Walid al-Khalidi. Now, Walid al-Khalidi is, to my mind, one of our great figures. I'm speaking as a Palestinian. A real intellectual, scholar, academic, very well educated. He used to teach at Oxford. He resigned in 1956 from his posting in criticism of England's involvement in the Suez War at the time. And he had good contacts with the PLO, but he was always also a person that had his own mind. And in 1972, I believe it was, or 71, he'd written an article in, I think, Foreign Affairs or something like this, in which he called Thinking the Unthinkable. He called the article Thinking the Unthinkable. And what was the unthinkable? The unthinkable was, let's make peace with Israel on the basis of setting up a state for the Palestinians. Now, incidentally, or coincidentally, let me say, right about that time, 71, 72, this other guy I told you about, not Walid al-Khalidi's son, but the other person, Hussein Agha, who has now coupled up with Bob Malley, wrote an article in Arabic in some journal, I can't remember where, in which he actually defended the idea of autonomy for the Palestinians. Imagine. So suddenly you have two ideas. The idea of autonomy for the Palestinians, written by this guy, Hussein Agha, in the West Bank, Gaza, and the idea of a state. Now even the idea of a state was something totally unacceptable, let alone the idea of autonomy that this guy was actually proposing. Now, I remember Walid Khalidi came to Harvard where I was a student, and he came and tried to convince us, the students, there were many Arab students by the time, and Palestinians, and he tried to convince us of his idea of a two-state solution, but I, for one, found what he said totally unacceptable, because I was still committed to the idea that, only one state will do for me. Now, perhaps I changed my mind about the constituents or the content of the state. I no longer thought, Arab state, whatever. I had begun thinking maybe something along the lines of, a secular, democratic, binational state. Things weren't really clear in my head, but I was beginning to think along those lines. And so I went on thinking like this until I came back and started teaching at Birzeit University and in the West Bank, and that was in 1978. And I came back to teach, and very quickly I became immersed in the life of the students of the university. And at the time, the life of the students of this particular university was the life of the student community throughout the Palestinian territories. And I began also becoming involved with the union of the faculty, the teachers' union. And again, the life of that union was in fact the life of a large network of federation of teachers throughout the West Bank, Gaza, who really, at the end of the day, constitute the elite of the West Bank and Gaza, if we can talk about an elite of the West Bank and Gaza. I'm talking about a group of people, I call them a first generation of university builders in the West Bank, Gaza, in Palestine. People like myself who 30 years ago, 35 years ago, came back from the United States or wherever and decided we want to build up our educational institutions. And, together maybe altogether today, you might count something like 1,500, only 1,500, say, holders of PhD degrees working throughout the universities in the West Bank and Gaza, who are, you know, with an academic interest, all right? And they actually played a very important role a little bit later on, and I'll come back to that, to let you know. But when I came back to work in this kind of context, and we began basically fighting against the Israeli occupation. Now it began to be the occupation that we started fighting against. It's no longer talking about Israel, Palestine. And the fact that it was addressed to the occupation, and the fact that my mind became focused on the occupation, was simply the facts of life. The very fact, in our case, that the Israeli military government at one stage wanted to basically control the life of the universities in the West Bank and Gaza. There's a very famous order they issued, one of thousands of orders, military orders that the government issued. And that one was, I remember the numbers still, I'm not very good at memory in general, but this one, I don't even remember my home phone number.